I want to thank everybody for again coming to our May Oregon City Business Alliance Forum. We had a tremendous turnout last month for the Whitewater presentation. So this month we're actually going to transition to another topic that seems to be on everybody's mind lately, and that is what are the ramifications and implications of legalizing recreational marijuana throughout the state and in our local communities. So we're honored to have City Planner Pete Walter with us today. Oregon City Police Chief Jim Band was scheduled to go ahead and participate in the discussion, but as you know, we had a recent shooting in Oregon City, so he is tied up in that investigation. But we do have Officer Nick Enos here today, who comes highly recommended by Police Chief Band by having experience in that field. So he'll be able to give some insights as well, and then we'll have Q&A afterwards. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge some of our elected officials that we have here today. To start with, Clackamas County Chair John Ludlow, glad to see you. And Clackamas County Commissioner Tootie Smith, nice to have you. Oregon City Commissioner Brian Shaw, oh, excuse me, didn't see you, Paul. County Commissioner Paul Savas. What? Oh, you know, I can't see her in front of me. And County Commissioner Jim Bernard, thank you. My total apologies there, Jim. Now we'll go ahead and introduce City Commissioner Brian Shaw. And former Mayor Doug Neely. Thank you for coming. And we have also running for a County Commission spot, Ken Hummerston. So appreciate all of you being here. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn the microphone over to Pete. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Kent, and thanks everybody for the invitation. We're in the middle of a process of regulation development for Oregon City. Currently, Oregon City has a temporary ban on marijuana businesses. This was put in place in December 2015. This was to give the city time to develop some regulations. The City Commission has put this issue on the ballot in November in accordance with state law. And recreational and medical marijuana businesses are temporarily banned in Oregon City, pending the ballot initiative. If Oregon City voters in November decide to legalize recreational marijuana here, then the city will implement reasonable regulations to provide a process for permitting and permitting those in places throughout the city. Next slide. So state law allows that cities can have reasonable regulation on time, place, and manner of marijuana businesses. And this includes examples like hours of operation, the location of all 4 types of marijuana businesses, as well as medical marijuana grow sites. An example of that would be specific zones within the city, separation requirements beyond what OLCC requires, and also manner of operation. And this is where you get into building codes, potentially, site plan and design review criteria, and those could affect odor regulation, security regulation, those kinds of things which are typically within the realm of zoning or building code. And any regulation the city passes must be in accordance with an adopted comprehensive plan, zoning ordinances, business license ordinances, and other regulations as they apply. Next slide. Definitions. This is under the state definition. Most of these you may already be familiar with. Marijuana being any plant in the cannabis family, not including industrial hemp. Important distinction there. If we're going to regulate it, we need to talk about that. Processing sites are an entity licensed by the OLCC to process marijuana. A producer or a grower is licensed by the OLCC to manufacture, plant, cultivate, grow, or harvest. Retailers, they are licensed by the OLCC. They sell directly to the consumer. And a wholesaler They will sell items for resale, but not directly to the consumer. And then finally, you have medical marijuana dispensaries, which are regulated separately by the Oregon Health Authority. Next slide. So the city has done 2 surveys so far in April and in May. These surveys were for gauging public opinion. They were to help staff begin the process of drafting regulations. They're not scientific. The April survey had 167 responses. It was very open-ended. Basically, we're asking people generalized questions about marijuana industry and where they felt it was appropriate. We weren't asking the question whether they felt it should be allowed or not. We're asking the question, if it's permitted, where, when, and how should it be permitted? The question of if it's permitted will be decided in November. May, we tightened up the questions a little bit more. We're starting to get into preferred locations, or we had 133 responses on that. And currently we have an open survey through June 3rd, which has 25 multiple choice questions. Most of them are zoning related. We've received 30 responses as of this morning. So please take the survey. It doesn't take long. It takes about 5 minutes. And you can also, at the end of that survey, give us your comments as well. Next slide. Some early survey conclusions. I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of charts and graphs, but we've got charts and graphs with the responses on our website if you'd like to check those out. Still a little early to tell, but generally production was favored in only industrial zones. Processing was favored in employment and industrial land, possibly mixed-use zones, given right constraints and regulations. Warehousing of marijuana favored wherever warehousing is permitted. Retail not favored anywhere near residential, parks, schools, or child care uses, otherwise generally okay, wherever retail is permitted, given separation requirements. And I want to go into what that meant. People generally favored additional separation requirements or buffering distances from parks, child care facilities, and residential areas, not just the 1,000-foot from schools that OLCC requires. And people also want good odor, security, screening, lighting, and design requirements. So those are all very much in favor. Some of that is regulated by the OLCC, but to the extent that it's not, the city can pass a reasonable regulation to do that. Next slide. So now I'm going to attempt to talk about economic impact a little bit. I'm sharing a lot of information which is on the web. One of the most detailed studies and probably non-biased studies out there is a RAND Corporation study looking at the potential influence of marijuana legalization in California. And the conclusion is that it's very difficult to estimate how much marijuana would be consumed in California or how that change would affect tax revenue, criminal justice costs, and healthcare costs. However, next slide, please. So there are some additional things I need to go into. Next slide, sorry, skip over that. Here we go. They do anticipate that the price of marijuana would decline hugely, up to as much as 80% once it's legalized. The consumer's price would depend heavily on tax and regulation. Consumption would increase, but it's not clear how much. Tax revenue could be dramatically higher or dramatically lower. There was an estimate of $1.4 billion. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what it would have on public, what effect this would have on public budgets, with even minor changes in assumptions leading to major differences in outcomes. And as I said in the report, the devil is in the details. So closer to home, next slide, please. Economic impact in Oregon. Currently, there's approximately 400 dispensaries participating in a temporary tax on recreational marijuana. That was authorized by Senate Bill 460. That's a 25% point of 25% point of sale tax. Medical marijuana still is not taxed. Next slide, please. And the Oregon Employment Department recently published a report. Doesn't have a lot of hard data on this new industry, but there is a potential for diversification with direct and indirect employment impacts in the fields of production, processing, consulting, retail, and marketing. And I've got the website of this report. This is very recent. Next slide. That report is based on a survey that the OLCC did February and March of 2015. At that time, there were only 230 dispensaries, and 326 of the current 413 registered dispensaries are certified for retail sale. The average worker makes about $12 an hour. 9.6% of those employees are covered by employer health insurance, and they estimate about 2,500 employees in all. Next slide. Did a quick web search on marijuana-related jobs and came up with, sorry about the writing on this, it's a little small. As you can see, every kind of job imaginable out there associated with this industry, courier and delivery, executive sales specialist, bud tenders, technicians who know how to extract certain tinctures and things like that, farmers, consultants, medical administrators, blog writers, delivery drivers, you name it. There's potentially a lot of job diversification in this industry. Next slide. I was asked to talk a little bit about banking. This is not my area of expertise. I found on Jeff Merkley's website a quote from Rivermark Community Credit Union CEO Scott Burgess saying from their perspective there's so many factors that they need to take into account when they're deciding they're going to loan to somebody. But at this point they don't serve marijuana-related businesses, but it's not even a consideration until they can figure out the issue with the federal banking. So next slide. Right now, there is a bill going through Congress. It's been introduced. It's called the Marijuana Business Access to Banking Act of 2015. The purpose of this is to create protections for depository institutions that provide financial services to marijuana-related businesses and for other purposes. So it would prohibit a bank regulator from stopping a bank from providing a loan to a marijuana-related business, terminating a bank's federal deposit insurance, and either recommending or incentivizing a financial institution to halt or downgrade any kind of banking services to a business, and take any action on a loan to an owner or operator of a marijuana-related business. So this is currently in the Judicial Committee, I believe, but going through the process. Next slide. There's a couple of reports out there after 2 years of legalization. Colorado Department of Public Health and also Washington Drug Enforcement report. The Colorado report has a lot of statistics in it. The summary is on our website, copied there, showing that marijuana usage has increased for younger adults and teens from 21% to 31% in 2014. Among those 26 or older, marijuana usage has increased from 5% in 2006 to 12% in 2014. 33% of marijuana users report using daily in the past 30 days. Marijuana-related arrests have decreased by 46%. Possession arrests were cut in half, and sales arrests have decreased by 24%. The trend for high school students ever using marijuana has declined from 42 to 36%, and the percentage of high school students currently using marijuana has decreased from 22 to 19% over the same period. Youth use in Colorado does remain above the national average. Next slide. Continue on with the summary. Hospitalizations have increased pretty dramatically from 803 per 100,000 pre-commercialization to about 2,500. And there's been a significant increase in emergency department visits. Prevalence of marijuana in DUIs has increased to 15%, although the total number of DUIs related to marijuana decreased slightly. And school discipline related problems with marijuana have increased slightly. That report is on the city website as well, the link to that report. Next slide. The Washington, what is that, the National, I forget what that acronym means. It's basically a high traffic drug corridor, Washington high traffic drug corridor enforcement report. Pretty extensive report, about 144 pages long, with a summary. Since it was legalized in Washington, 533 producers, 460 processors, producing approximately 60,000 pounds of legal marijuana during 1 year of recreational commercialization. 68% of those products fall into the baked goods or desserts category, and 90% of public safety violations, next slide, are dealing with minors. Youth impacts, 1 in 5 10th grade students reported riding with a driver who'd used marijuana, and 9% reported driving within 3 hours of consumption, and between 2013 and 14, almost 50% of statewide student expulsions were related to marijuana, and 42% of suspensions. Next slide. So 98% of drug violations in the Seattle public school system involve marijuana, and in 2014, youth under the age of 20 made up 45% of the statewide poison center calls since legalization, and so those calls have increased to 80%. That's pretty significant. Youth treatment admissions for marijuana have remained between 66 and 70% of overall admissions since 2010. Next slide. As far as adult impacts go, there has been an increase and at least people are using once a day. Washington State young adults were using marijuana 6% higher than the nation's average. Washington State young adults and adults in the past month, marijuana use was 5% higher. So it's very detailed report. Next slide. DUIs associated with marijuana have increased, surprisingly, but as our Officer Enos will talk about a little bit, a lot of that is hard to detect, but you've got a big proportion of people who don't believe that marijuana impairs their driving, according to the Washington State Traffic Safety Commission. But people with active THC in their blood involved in fatal driving accidents has increased 122%. Next slide. So we'll now switch into the question of sustainability of the industry. When we talk about sustainability, we're talking about how a particular industry affects not only the environment, but the society and the economy. Some people call that triple bottom line. From a social perspective, we're talking about moral impact, family impact, impact on the fabric of society. Environmental impacts have to do with resource impacts and local infrastructure impacts and those sorts of things. A lot of that is what I concentrate my profession on, is essentially the environmental part or the infrastructure impact part of it. Then you've got the economic part, so how much public and private revenue is affected by the industry. It's very difficult to measure this at this point, particularly given federal, state, and local regulations and infrastructure and resource demands. The sustainability of an industry when they're growing outside in California and have access to lots of land and plenty of room and that sort of thing is entirely different than if you're forcing a grower to grow inside in an industrial area with pretty high infrastructure demands and those sorts of things. And we don't know the long-term demand of any of this. So if it's legalized elsewhere in other states, will the demand in Oregon be affected by that? And that will affect the bottom line. Next slide, please. So a lot of the Oregon Department of Revenue data is still to be collected, but there's currently a permanent tax rate on recreational marijuana of 17%. There's a temporary tax rate through dispensaries of 25% that's collected this year. The Department of Revenue estimates that we'll have approximately 550 licensed retailers in 2017-2019. The Department of Revenue will use the tax revenue to cover their own expenses for administering the marijuana tax, and that's permitted under House Bill 2041. After that, the money is dispersed according to percentage basis. Common School Fund, 40%. Mental health, alcoholism, and drug services, 20%. State police, 15%. Next slide, please. Cities would get 10% for law enforcement. Counties, 10% for law enforcement. The Oregon Health Authority for alcohol and drug abuse prevention and treatment, 5%. And then the formula for those disbursements is determined by population through July 2017. And after that, disbursements would be determined by the number of licenses issued by OLCC in a given area. And we don't know what that's going to be in Oregon City. Areas that prohibit recreational marijuana won't receive any marijuana tax revenue. Next slide, please. Very recent article from Oregonian, May 23rd, saying that Oregon is expected to take in about $43 million in tax revenue from recreational marijuana. They had predicted significantly less, between 2 to 3 million in revenue. Oregon has already collected $10.5 million in the first 3 months. The Office of Legislative Revenue, and this is the economist that worked on this report, estimated that tax collections from pot sales would drop to $31 million in 2017 when the lower tax rate goes into effect. Next slide. OLCC has some excellent resources on their website. The Business Readiness Guidebook was recently put out. It's got 40 pages of essential information for any business looking to start a business related to marijuana in Oregon. It's got a lot of legal background in it from the state, and that guidebook is available from the website www.marijuana.oregon.gov. Next slide. So what we're asking for is more participation in this process. Clackamas County has already adopted regulations. A lot of cities in Clackamas County are considering it. Some are opted out, as Oregon City has, but are putting it on the ballot for November. We're trying to keep our website up to date and add all these reports in so you can access them in one place. Please do take our survey, number 3, and send me any written feedback you have. We have public hearings. We haven't provided public notice of the public hearings yet, but we're tentatively planning on the first public hearing for the Planning Commission on July 11th and the first City Commission hearing on August 3rd. And this is how to get a hold of us. That's my contact information, and thank you very much. Questions? Yeah.
Pete, in that same article, and I read the article that was in the Oregonian also,
yeah.
talked about the revenues exceeding $40 million. They said one of the major concerns that they have now is in the ability to actually have testing labs certified for the potency of the product and pesticides in the product. And they only have one testing lab that's in the process of being certified right now. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have any way of testing it, is that product allowed to be sold?
I believe the OLCC is looking at trying to, get more testing labs out there. I don't know the answer to that, but I would anticipate that there's going to be a need for more testing labs, and the OLCC will control that process entirely. Yeah.
It seems as a business alliance, we should be promoting somebody to open up a testing lab,
Sure.
since there's going to be huge demand for that.
Yeah, we didn't really ask about testing labs as a land use type question on our survey. It's certainly something that we're considering. It's probably something that's going to be a lot more regulated and controlled and scientific, and it would occur in a very controlled environment. So where testing labs are already permitted in Oregon City, may be a possibility, that sort of thing.
Are you going to have proposed regulations written up as to what it will be, so the voters actually know what it will be?
We're hoping to have those coincide as much as possible and have a draft of those regulations. If they're not adopted before the ballot goes on the ballot, then certainly they'll be available. As I said, the Planning Commission hearing will be July 11th. We'll have regulations drafted before then. Yeah.
On your just some of the proposed criteria, distance from schools, distance from residential areas, have you hypothetically put those on a map already? Because most of our commercial corridors are pretty close to residences and or schools. So is there a place where that works?
There's a few. We did map those, and we displayed them at our open house, but we need to put those maps up on the website. There are a few places where it appears to work. One is the landfill site around there, assuming it was permitted in mixed-use areas. So you'd have to make that assumption. And then along Beaver Creek Road, further east towards 213. But that's applying all of the buffers, worst case scenario, at 1,000 feet for child care, 1,000 feet for parks, 250 feet for child care, and the other buffers. And then nothing in residential, exclusively residential areas. So that takes out about, half or more of the city. Yeah.
Maybe this is a question for the police officers. Do you know of any problems that have arisen in Vancouver, for instance, where this is a cash business and there's no depository for that cash by the businesses?
Come up and talk here.
So I can speak to the medical marijuana realm, just based on investigations that I've done. It is a cash business, and that it does draw a criminal element sometimes. I've had investigations where a home invasion robbery occurred, and they were there to steal as much marijuana that was there as well as much cash as well. I don't know any statistics for Vancouver as far as the recreational side of things, but definitely in the medical side, because it was primarily a cash business, there has been some repercussions in related to that. Yes, sir.
There's discussion about how much money Oregon tax revenue is going to do, but to bring it down to Oregon City, I was chatting with the chief, and I think that he said that it was closer to about $10,000 a year. Pretty loose thing to guess at. But Tony, any idea at all what we could be talking about income for this city?
No, I don't have an estimate.
Yeah, I think we're just grasping smoke here is to try to guess how much money we could talk. I mean, certainly not going to take any economic concerns for the city away. But I don't know that it's going to be a giant windfall for us either.
I remember attending a conference where Police Chief Band and representatives from the Sheriff's Department and other police departments throughout the region had a panel, and he was talking about how much it was going to cost to retrain your sniffing dogs, retrain your personnel to now follow these new regulations if it is adopted. Are you personally going to be going through a lot of retraining, or do you have the training already?
I received some specialized training. So just a little background, I've been with Oregon City Police Department for 10 years. For 2 years of that, I was assigned to the Clackamas County Interagency Narcotics Task Force. So that was from 2008 to 2010, and while there I received some specialized training. During that time frame, it was kind of the infancy of the medical marijuana boom, and a lot of our enforcement were people that were grossly abusing the medical marijuana laws. We weren't arresting people who had a joint in their pocket. We were going after people who were either double or triple the amount of plants they were allowed, and the dried product as well. As far as retraining our dogs, we have 2 canine officers in Oregon City. They are not cross-trained for narcotic detection at this point. I know that the county canines that are cross-trained for narcotic detection, they are having to, and I don't know how they're going to do this, but they're having to untrain the dog to alert on marijuana, basically, and alert on all the other narcotics. And that's a process that they're going through at this point. I don't think we have any plans to cross-train our canines for narcotic detection at this point. As far as officers being retrained, we've had some training through the DA's office on as far as enforcement of the new laws. The new laws are pretty convoluted, so we have some flow charts to kind of go by. At this point, our standpoint is we're going to enforce it by the law, and basically in the same fashion that we enforce alcohol-related crimes or incidences. And that pertains to where you're allowed to possess it, where you're allowed to use it, and as well as the driving while under the influence portion of it. For us, it's going to be very similar to alcohol enforcement. Yes, ma'am.
Back to the tourism question. If I don't know the answer to this, but I just thought of it. If a hotel allows cigarette smoking, do they have an ability to say cigarettes are okay, but marijuana isn't, or the other way around?
I don't know the answer to that. I think some of that's going to come out of the rulemaking that OLCC is doing right now. And it's a great question. I'll look into it. Yeah.
Okay, well, great. We appreciate it, Pete and Nick, you taking the time to be with us today. Obviously, as we get closer to the election day, I'm sure a lot of more questions will come up as to how everything's going to be regulated and enforced. I myself have a lot of questions, but I'll save that for afterwards. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in June. Thank you.